We have a pop-up window here. I set up some simple CSS to put this in the middle of the page, and what I want to do is just wire up that close button so it will close it. And in this video I'm going to show you kind of the simplest to the most complicated or most advanced way to do this. So the simplest thing we could do would be to just write an inline on click handler. This is frowned upon a bit as mixing your JavaScript into your HTML, but much like putting inline styles, it's the easiest thing to understand. So if you say on click, it's going to run whatever's in those quotes as JavaScript. And inside of those quotes, you're going to have access to the special word event. So an event is the JavaScript representation of the click itself. So the event has, among other things, the target, which is the thing that was clicked, which in this case is this button. So if I simply said onClick event.target.remove, we'll see what happens. I now successfully just removed the button. So I didn't have to write any JavaScript in my JS file. I just wrote event.target.remove in my HTML, and that took the button. Well, it took the event. The target of the event was the click, and then it removed it. So if I wanted to remove the card instead of the button, I can use the simplest way to find the parent, which would be parent element, and remove that. So now if I do this, boop, there we go. My pop-up button disappears. So that's the simplest way to accomplish this. But it's not very robust. And if we make some changes, if we made more of these buttons, we would have to write more and more code right inside of our HTML, and that's pretty frustrating. So what most people do, which would be almost identical here, the next step would be to just call a function in your onClick handler. And we call a function by typing its name and then passing it an argument, in this case the argument event. I just created a new name, close popup, and then in my JavaScript I define a function by typing the word function and the name of the function. And then I give a name to the arguments I'm going to get. In this case I'm going to use the exact same word, event. So just for demonstration purposes, I could call this an E here. And this here in the onClick, the word event is magic, but it just becomes whatever word I type here. So if I took E, that's the thing that I was passed, which is the event, the target, parent element, remove. Once again, that works. And we're back. Okay. So this is really 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Instead of typing this line of code inside of the onClick, I put a function and then named it. Now, why would I do that? I would do that because often I want to write more code here. So, for example, what if I decided that this card needed a header to look good, and maybe I change up my CSS a bit. Let's get rid of our CSS. Sorry, it's hard not to play with. All right, when I get the parent element is now the header. So what I probably want to do instead is search for the popup class. So now I could say let popup equals e.target.closest. That'll search my relatives. I will search for the class popup. And now I might even add an if statement, so I can check if the popup exists. If popup, popup remove, and I can write an else statement that will print a warning. All right, so there's the close, and let's imagine that I made a typo here in my code. Now if I inspect, I'm going to get that there was no pop-up for this event, and I can see the event and everything. Actually, let's go ahead and add the target too. And now I can see like, oh, this button did not have a parent called popup. So cool, I just added a little warning to my code. It got a little bit fancier. Again, that's more code than I would want to write inside of my HTML. It's much nicer to have it here. Okay, the next step is instead of putting the event handler right in my HTML, I can actually make a new, like a setup function, which will automatically set up all the pop-ups. So maybe this would say for let pop-up or close button of this will select everything with the class close. And then I can say close button, add event listener, and that's the equivalent of adding that on click, but I can create the name of the event, and then I give it the name of the function to run. So in this case, I'll just say close popup. All right. Now nothing happens because this function was never called. I just created the setup, and we might do that in an onload or something, but we're just going to call the function directly here, setup popups. And there it works. The advantage of that is if in my code I had a bunch of pop-ups, because they're absolute position, these are all on top of each other. Here, let me make the pop-up have a background so that it's not see-through. Now I can close them one at a time until they're all gone. So all of those pop-ups worked with one piece of code. This just said, hey, go through all of my selectors and close the pop-up. All right, in this case, I find the parent using closest, I call remove, and I've ended the pop-up. The last bit of magic might be to add a transition when the pop-up is removed. So in that case, instead of just removing it, I might want to say popup dot class list dot add fade out. I'll comment out the remove line for now. And now I can add a fade out. Right. And now it fades. And again, I could do whatever I wanted there. I could also make it disappear like that off the screen. So whatever, There, now I've added a transition. If I want to actually remove it after the transition, I can get a little bit fancier. I can add yet another event listener. So I can now say listen for the transition end event. And I can put my listener right in there. When the transition is over, remove it. So actually, to make this obvious what's happening, I'm going to make my opacity only go down to 0.5 so that we can still see it. And I'll make sure these stay on the screen so we can see them. So let's put it at 50 pixels. All right, great. So this will move. There we go. Those are actually removed from the DOM now after the transition. Last note, especially for beginners, it can be very handy to add comments next to your code. As much as possible, we want to name our code clearly. So for example, close popup, it's obvious what it does. But we can use / to add little comments here. So get the popup parent. If it exists, add the fadeout class. Note, fadeout triggers a transition. And when it does, do this, remove the element from the DOM. If there is no pop-up, print a warning. So this would be commented very carefully. Experienced programmers would not write these comments, but as you're learning, it can be very helpful to just think through step by step what your code is doing. All the pop-ups. All right, there you go.